So I'm going to call the meeting of BUHS Board number 6 to order at 7 p.m. today, November 5th. Before we jump into other things, I just wanted us to take a minute. I don't know if other people saw it or not last week in the paper, but Jerry Gagliardi, who was a longtime teacher and dean of students here at the high school, prior to that he taught elementary school here in town, so he's a longtime educator and succumbed to a long illness, and he passed away. So I want to take a minute, just a moment of silence for Jerry. Thank you. All right, thank you. And as usual, let's start with the clerk's report and approval of the minutes of our last meeting, which was October 15th. Is there a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes of October 15th, 2018.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Is there any additions, deletions, corrections, changes we need to make to those minutes? Yes.
I start off by apologizing that we probably should have noticed these little nits earlier, and I don't want to spend a lot of time. It's important stuff to do over here at the meeting, but I noticed that not all the board members are listed under attendees or are not there. The BUH Finance Committee had nothing posted after it. I just note that committee did not meet. Just a procedural thing, the consent agenda, the motion to approve should be probably after the committee reports, because they're part of consent agenda.
Right, yeah.
Small stuff, but just so we have everything in the record.
Would it be possible to drop a quick email to Barb to correct those things?
For me?
Yeah. It'd be easier for you since you have it all documented.
Okay. Be happy to.
I would appreciate that.
Any other additions, deletions, or corrections to the minutes? All right, so all in favor of approving the minutes as amended, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Abstaining for absent. Okay, great. Do any board members have any communications to come before them tonight? Seeing none, I'm going to move out of clerk's report to recognition of groups and individual visitors. And we have a few individual visitors, and I know that there's some presentations that are going to happen, and we'll kind of get to those early in the process. But let's just identify who's here and why they're here. And why don't we start this way, and we'll kind of work our way around the room here. So people that are not normally here.
Yeah, so we are here to represent student council, and there's more of us than usual because we just got many new members. Would you like us to talk about what we're doing now or later?
Well, later on during the student council report,
Okay.
guys can do that.
So I am Amelia.
I'm Lily. Hi, I'm Sophia.
I'm Jackson.
I'm Gus.
Great. Excellent. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I'm Robert Clark. I'm the facility manager here, and we're here to talk about Nantawich Field.
I'm with Robert. I'm Chris Sawyer.
Let's move over this way.
Devin Rhodes, president, spokesperson of Team Tenney, representing Team Tenney.
Bill Christmas with Team Tenney.
I'm Jacqueline Penson. I'm here just to talk about the athletic training department.
You all set? Okay. All right. So why don't we, I know that the athletic training department needs to do some setup. So why don't we maybe move the Nantawich Field Team Tenney conversation, the turf discussion up to the top, and we'll do that now while Jacqueline, you can go ahead and do your setup during that time. How's that sound? So, so why don't we do that? So it's listed for people that are looking at the agenda under new business. The turf field discussion is happening right now. So, all right. Yeah.
We're here, this is Chris Sawyer, the athletic director, myself, Robert Clark, facility manager. We have been working on Natowich Field, back in 2008, we started with a plan, and the plan was to recreate Natowich Field, and to modernize it, to improve it, and to make it a place where you want to bring your kids as a family event. We've got this lighting, we've now got this great grandstands, press box, we've got the track, and we're missing one piece. And we've studied the athletic fields, and no matter how you try to slide people on, Chris knows way more about this, he can talk about that. All the different sports that are now available to the student body, and they've added some. We anticipate losing some field space that we've always had. Barmalari Field.
Mm-hmm.
And the pressure on the fields, will they hold up? We get a later start than everybody else because we have a different time here. So that puts more pressure on the athletic department because it gets darker earlier. And having that sports lighting, which is already in place, could extend the practice times, the playing times. They could start earlier in the spring by having a turf field. And so this is just an opening discussion on that, very high level, to see if there's an interest in moving forward with a feasibility study, if this is something you would like us to pursue further. And we would certainly entertain any questions. And like I said, on the field usage, Chris could really explain that a lot better than I could on just how much pressure is on that field.
So I could just catch up. I think we actually did studies in 2002 as well. So this has been ongoing for a while. And I think it's just obvious that we do have a field space need, even with the work being done on the practice field. And we have a need for more flexible fields. So it's a kind of a twofold situation. And just looking at some numbers, like Natowich Field last year was used in the fall for 30 to 40 hours, and in the spring, well over 160 hours. So that was 200 hours of use Natowich Field got. And while it's holding in there, going back to studies, the American Society of Landscape Architects quotes, a field should be used for no more than 120 hours a year. And Stevens and Associates back in 2002 said our field should not be used for more than 15 games a year. And right now with lacrosse and football, it's being used over 50 games. So that's one thing with the overuse, but all of our fields are getting that same use. Both Sawyer Field, Natowich Field, and Tenney Field, with soccer, field hockey, and the various sports. But then a bigger situation, our fields are just not that flexible. You know, we've done a disposition of fields and we can get that. We've done it in the past, we could do that again. But just some examples, looking at our field hockey program. They currently play games on Tenney Field. And as people are aware, the field lays on the dirt infield. So when they make the playoffs, they're not allowed to host field hockey playoff games according to the VPA, because you can't play field hockey, a playoff game, on a dirt infield. So 2 years ago, we hosted a playoff game in Bellows Falls. So that's an example of increased costs, and just, you know, it's just not, our kids work hard all year to earn home fields, and then we don't get to enjoy it. Our boys and girls soccer programs, you know, they also play home games on Tenney Field. It's the smallest legal field we can have lengthwise in the state. It's 100 yards long. So that's very limiting. It also extends onto the dirt infield, so it's not a very wide field. We do have Sawyer Field, but we really can't use that for varsity games either, because if you play a 4:30 game on Sawyer Field, that means you play a JV game at Fort Dummer, and that really means 4 teams can't practice that day. So with the improvement on the practice field, that's going to alleviate the problem, but if we didn't play a night game, we'd still have 2 teams not allowed to practice. So that's just, it's really a not great situation when you talk about teams being able to compete at a state level, having a small field. Some of the better quality teams from the north really don't want to come to Brattleboro and play on a smaller field. They're not going to really want to drive 2.5 hours to play on a short field, so that limits us. This fall we had 5 games rained out and had to move, and that's disruptive to student scheduling and just families and everything that goes along with that. So playing games on Tenney is not a great alternative. So that's kind of the overuse, but there's other examples that could be used. We don't scrimmage at home in lacrosse, soccer, football. Again, we do everything we can to limit the wear and tear on our fields, and all that kind of adds up money-wise. So I think there is a need for more field space and just fields that can be flexible.
Yeah, flexibility.
Flexibility, which led us to the discussion about Natowich, and I think we're also here to discuss synthetic surface on Natowich Field. And I think, like Robert said, Natowich Field has all the components of a first-class facility. It's got a press box where media can be up there and coaches can film games, and that's becoming a bigger attraction to parents and students as they try to get into colleges and just to improve their play to be able to watch film. So there's a press box on Natowich. We have bleachers, so we have seating for both home and away crowds. We have lights on Natowich. It's just a really nice field, and everybody should have that opportunity to play on that field if they can. It's in the middle of our campus, and we talk about community, and I think that's what our student body recognizes as maybe Brattleboro's athletic field. And we don't want it just to be a football field. We want it to be an athletic field for our entire student body. Why are we not playing soccer on that field yet? Is mainly because of the overuse. If we're already playing football and lacrosse, we can't add more. And it's too rough for field hockey, and then soccer would just add a whole different animal to the. So that's kind of where turf would come into the discussion on Natowich Field.
And also, Chris has mentioned to me several times that in the springtime, they're at a disadvantage with the other schools because of the later starting time, because they can't play in the fields. And with the synthetic turf, you can stop much earlier in the season and start your practices. We don't have that right now, so our kids are always behind the other kids.
There's also, there's a lot of reasons we could talk about, but just even when you talk about getting out at 3:30 in the spring, because we don't want to play games in early April on that field, we generally wait till vacation or after vacation, have home games. It might mean boys and girls lacrosse have 4 or 5 away games to start a year, and that could be a cluster of getting out of class 3 times in a week. And we can't really spread out, play home, play away, play home, play away. We kind of get these schedules where we're away 7 times and then home 7 times, but missing 7 classes in a 2 or 3 week period, those are all just the little things that add up as well.
Do board members have questions related to Bob?
Setting aside the overuse issue, we would need to do something to Natowich Field soon. In any case, the surface itself. Is that what we're looking at?
Well, I can tell you the last time the field was done, and my research was by Natowich. 1965 wasn't that the last time that field was renovated? So, been a while.
Yeah.
Got a concern about the security, as you say, you do lay down that new AstroTurf there. I don't think, you want to be open to the public for use after hours, after the school is using it, but you don't want it to get vandalized. And I would think that there'd have to be some sort of protection. It's not just the cost of the material of the field itself, but also some sort of enclosure. I didn't know if you were thinking about that or if you think that would be necessary, but.
Yeah, that's a concern. So there's a lot of pros to synthetic surface, and there are some cons and things to think about. we never really talked about the pros. As a con for that is, we've checked in with some schools that currently have synthetic surfaces, Rutland High School, Burton, Burlington and South Burlington. Burlington has a fence similar to what we currently have on Natowich Field. Rutland is the same way. Burton has no fence, and South Burlington doesn't either. We've asked the companies that install it, and they've really never seen a lot of vandalism done to fields. You know, we're pretty fortunate down here. There hasn't been a lot of vandalism to our fields. A school did let off fireworks display a few years ago and burnt their field. South Burlington 2 years ago had racist words painted on the field, and 3 years before that, a truck got on the field and did figure eights because, again, they don't have any gate. They do make solvents to get out the paint. It was a lengthy process, but not overly expensive. The figure eights, the way the carpets are laid down is they are sewn by section, so they did have to replace a couple of the panels in that regard. But yeah, do we want a taller fence than we currently have? We don't want to lose the openness to the public. But so far, other schools are not reporting really a big concern with damage done because of vandalism.
And I will say, in addition to that, since I've been here almost 20 years now, so I started in the old BUHS, in the old middle school, and the vandalism rate back then was very high, and I spent a lot of time fixing vandalism. And then we did this project, and vandalism dropped off dramatically. And it's amazing how much vandalism there isn't. It seems to be people focus too much on, there was some vandalism. Okay, he is writing in the bathroom. But they didn't light the place on fire. I mean, I remember when the bathrooms were burning. I remember there was a lot going on here, and it doesn't even exist anymore. So the more, I guess what I'm saying is the better everything becomes, and it's kept up, people tend to take pride in it versus things that are run down, because it kind of gives off the appearance that you don't care. And versus if you really put the effort in, like we put a lot of effort in, keep painting the hallways over and over and over again. We're not doing it just because we like to paint. We're doing it because we always want the building to look fresh and clean. And it's amazing how little vandalism we really have. And I think that turf field would just add that sparkle to that field, would really make it pop. It's like the last piece of the puzzle. And I can just see everybody bringing their kids here, and the family and the colonel's den cooking hamburgers and playing under the lights, and just a great family gathering place.
And so beyond the positive things, turf doesn't know it's turf. You can play on it nonstop. It doesn't need a break. And it would be wide enough to play soccer and give us one of the most attractive, or as good as any other soccer field in the state. Beyond those positives, I think the Burton athletic director, again, talking about vandalism, just said the only con is just everybody always wants to be on it. So the field really doesn't sit unused that often, because from 3:30 to, and we could practice at night, like Robert said earlier, but then just Saturdays and Sundays, people are on that field in the community. So it does take care of itself, and people do police it a little bit.
So, Chris, you just mentioned too about the basically if it was a turf field, we could play on it all non-stop. So when you say non-stop compared to what we deal with now, can you give us an idea what a typical day schedule might look like, in the fall?
So in the fall, like I said, because it's overused, for instance, we only play football games on it. We don't even have walk-through practices anymore, so we only currently play football games on that field in the fall. So what would happen if it was a turf field? We could play night games. I would envision every night there'd be a different game: boys soccer, girls soccer, field hockey, football. But prior to those games, we'd also be able to have a practice. So maybe the team who, say, boys soccer has a Thursday night game, maybe they practice on it Wednesday afternoon. while girls soccer had a Wednesday night game, maybe they practice, so we would juggle that. So we'd really try to see it in use from 3:30 to 9:30 or 10 o'clock in the fall. We currently have that same use with Tenney Field. So, we'd just be shifting the venue, but we'd be gaining additional practice time on Tenney. And we could literally practice until, night prevents us, which is a problem right now. Boys soccer and girls soccer the varsity teams start practice, 5 o'clock, 4:45?
Yeah.
And then in the late fall, October, you're really limited to your practice time. So we would be able to practice into the night. And in the spring, same thing. We would just 3:30. I'm sure we'd be done before 10 because it's kind of our cutoff for practices.
But in the spring, it could be used for boys lacrosse, girls lacrosse,
Yeah.
ultimate frisbee.
Correct.
I'll add something. Is that all right?
Yeah.
And just like to add about the turf field, like it would bring a lot of wear and tear off of the other natural grass fields. Like I know by the end of the season, Sawyer and Tenney are both, they're beautiful at the beginning of the season, then you just see it go downhill. So,
Especially if it rains.
right. Yeah, I mean, and it's just like those fields do get a lot of wear and tear, and so playing on them, even practicing on them, you can see the difference from the beginning and the ending of the season. So. And I mean, about like I know last year for the lacrosse team, we struggled getting field space. We were in the gym for like 3 weeks, and just because it was late snows, and we actually ended up traveling up to Landmark because they just got synthetic turf field. So those fields do have like draining systems, and they heat up and melt the snow a lot quicker than a natural field. So it is a bonus in the spring. So.
I mean, I've shared this story before, but I took a kid on a college visit a few years ago, and it was in the early spring. It was like Accepted Students Day, and their baseball team was practicing on their turf field, and they plowed the turf field, and basically the outfield lines were snowbanks, but there was 8-foot snowbanks all around the outfield, but they were playing baseball on the turf field with snow on the ground. So, does anybody else have questions related to this?
Well, I was just wondering, I think you mentioned you're sort of looking for direction from the board on how we proceed with this. And we have discussed it at quite a good bit of detail within the Finance Committee. So I think that there's been quite a bit of energy put into the idea. So should I make a motion that these two gentlemen should go ahead and do the next phase of planning, preparing for a turf field on Natowich? That'd be my motion.
So there's a motion. We have a second.
What would that plan be? Or what would the next steps be?
Well, I think what you mentioned right at the outset is that you've done studies starting in 2002, 2008, and now you need to go the next step, maybe put it out or find out about putting it out to bid and so forth.
A feasibility study.
Feasibility, yeah.
To really start to drill down into okay, what does this mean? And there's a lot of different synthetic turf companies out there, and they all claim to be the best and greatest. And I can tell you that, Robert Kraft is a very, very smart man. He put down synthetic turf and ripped it back up 3 months later, put down another one. So you can get it wrong if you don't do your homework. There is a lot to it. There's a lot of different companies out there selling stuff. Landmark put in one that's has a coconut base, you told me?
Yes, so there's different.
Doesn't do well in cold weather. So there was a little lack of homework done on that side. When coconuts, cold weather, I don't know how that. So those are the things the pitfalls that we want to avoid. So we want to talk to other schools. What have you done? What do you have? Some of the schools that have had turf longer periods of time. So great, it always looks great when it's first put down. What's it going to look like in 10 years from now? We want to talk to some of those schools, maybe go visit some of those schools. And then we'd have a better sense. I did make a phone call to the engineer because I was concerned with stormwater runoff. with our permitting, and the expert told me that that is not going to affect our stormwater permitting, and that's a very good thing, because there's a lot of different regulations with stormwater now. It's getting pretty complicated. And some of the stuff, when I put the track in, I anticipated that if in the future this came about, that I had the pipes installed under the track, capped them off the ends, so we wouldn't have to dig into the track or any of that stuff. So the drainage has already been installed under the track to make it easier. And then the drains hookup would be on the practice field, which we're going to be working on very shortly. And then as part of that project, I'm going to run a line over to Natowich. Just while I'm there digging anyways, I'm already working on the drainage. So to have it all set and ready to go, if this does come to fruition, that would be all ready. And that's just less money to have to spend down the road, or one less problem to deal with.
Steve?
Yeah, could one of you talk a little bit about the maintenance of a turf field and the longevity of a turf field? Like what's required every year,
So-
what's required every few years?
When you do purchase a turf field and it is installed, there is less maintenance than you would have for a natural turf field, but I think they might be a little overstated. You know, we are going to groom the field once a month. And to do that, basically we would buy a grooming apparatus. I would go on the back of a gator, which we have, and I think something like that costs $5,000, is what other schools have said. So that would be a $5,000 purchase. And then you would groom the field one time a month. And basically, I don't know, we could talk about a turf field a little bit, but it's made up of fibers, which is the grass, and then infill, which is the rubber, and the sand, which holds the grass in place. That needs to be groomed so everything's even like it was when it was made. You also have to sweep it and go around a rake every now and then in certain places. You would clean it, you know, if people throw up on a field like that or something, you do need to clean it. You can use regular soap and water. So there would be maintenance involved. It's not going to be a maintenance fee, but you're not going to be watering it every day. You're not going to be mowing it. If we put a turf field in, we would have all the lines for the sports put in so that we would not be painting it. So there'd be a lot less maintenance and grounds crew work on that field and every other field, because we could do a lot less. We wouldn't have to be painting game fields on Tenney and Sawyer Field all the time. So maintenance-wise, once you buy that apparatus, it's pretty much just doing your due diligence every month. So there's no special hidden costs. Sorry, and then to speak of, the turf right now has a life of conservatively 10 years. In 10 years, that turf would need to be replaced.
But not the subsurface, you're just talking about
But the actual
carpet.
carpet would need to be replaced. I think South Burlington put their field in 2004, and they replaced it in 2016. So they got 12 years out of it. Burlington High School put a field in 2007. That's still in place. Rutland High School in 2008. Theirs is still in place. So they're right around. So companies will say 10 to 15 years, but I think you should say 10 years. Sorry to interrupt.
I don't think there was a second. No, there was. I will second. And would the discussion about cost come in this next phase? Is that where we get a price?
I would assume we would start getting an idea about numbers during a feasibility
I mean, we
study.
already have some idea of numbers too, but it's a little early in the game. This is really high level right now. We're just talking, you know, about how we want to proceed with it, and then we'd really get into the details of it.
I mean, it sounds like a valuable thing. We just have to find out how much it's going to cost to see if it's valuable enough to warrant the price.
I saw Russ saying before.
Yeah, no, I was going to go down the same sort of line as Ian. One more preliminary question is, if we authorize a preliminary study, which is what I assume is what this motion is, how much that would about be, and is it already in the budget, and which budget is it? I assume if we did a field, then we'd have to work it, and I'm sure the budget committee has talked about this, but, the feel is, we have to be working the long-range capital plan or something like that. But where would how much would the feasibility study or the advice, and you're right that if we're gonna go forward with it, we certainly need it, because we don't wanna get pineapple fields, let alone coconut fields. But how much is it in? Is it in the budget? Are we talking about, so in some sense, I'm wondering even why it's a board decision as opposed to something within the athletic director's discretion budget. Yeah, thanks.
Respond to that one. At this point, in our 5-year capital plan, which we will be, as we go through the budgeting process here, we'll be reviewing, and it's a moving, living document that gets updated periodically. At this point, we have just a placeholder numbers in there for 2020 and 2021. 2020 being the budget we're going to be working on now, of $100,000 each year. Now that has nothing to do specifically with feasibility study, for sure. And as we get more direction from the board down the road, we will update those numbers and put them in the appropriate year. But it will be a part of the thought process in our budgeting this fall.
So I guess my more specific question was maybe it's gone into two, is, it's great to get the information, but one, does it require board action? And two, is the money for the feasibility study, which would take place soon, I assume, where is that coming from? Under what?
Well, we have, feasibility study is not going to cost, it's more my time and Chris's time and our effort and our due diligence. Now I'll need some professional engineering services, especially one of the big expenses of putting a turf field is the drainage. And when we were trying to discuss cost with companies that supplied the service, that was a big sticking point. Well, that's the big unknown, what do you have for drainage and so forth. So I would like to have an engineer certify what we have for drainage, because I think we've got a pretty good system already in place. It's just a matter of plug and play, which the companies that we had out here don't know about. I mean, explained a little bit to them, but they kind of they're just out here as they throw a quick number at you and they walk away. They know it's not real. They're just kind of giving you some idea of a range in the ballpark of, and it's been from a low of say 8 to 9 to a high of 1.2. So that's a big range, and a big part of that was drainage.
No, I think it's a good idea to move forward on this, but I'm just wondering again, why we need a board approval for it. It sounds like a good idea to look at it, and if we need board approval because we need more money for it, where that money is coming from.
I think it's more of a process of, for myself, I can only speak for myself, I wouldn't want to do anything the board doesn't want me to do, because you guys pay me to work for you, to do a good job here, and if I'm doing something you don't want me to do, I'm not being productive.
Okay.
And I think to answer your question too, Russ, as Sean mentioned before, the Finance, Building, and Transportation Committee has had some conversations about this and looked at some of this stuff in a preliminary way, and we felt that it was important for the whole board to kind of get brought up to speed, because I know that I'll speak for myself as a member of that committee and a member of this board. I've been approached by people in the community that have heard bits and pieces, rumors, not rumors, so we felt it was important for the whole board to be informed as to what we know up to this point and be okay with the idea of going with the next step, so that, and also to have it be out there in the public what we're talking about. because I've heard everything from the fact that we're breaking ground and doing this now to this is never going to happen and everything in between. And we, as a board, had never even had a discussion about it. So when it came to me, I've always said we've never even talked about it as a board. So you know, what you're hearing and saying don't match that because we haven't had that conversation.
It should be pointed out too that within our budget, in addition to items that might require bonds and so forth, we have operating expenses that we always budget for, and Robert does a great job with his budget of staying within that. And I would speculate that some work on feasibility would fit within our current budget.
It will.
For this year or next year or whatever.
That was my only issue. I mean, if you're able to do the bulk of it within the time, that's terrific. I mean, and take a look, and then we can answer Ian's questions about how expensive it is, and what Steve was bringing up in terms of future expenses and how, you know, in 10 years, and you know, so those are things to find out. And if it's you know, do we think it's important for you to go and look at those things? I'm all in favor of that.
And we'll factor in expense avoidance too. If we do a turf, then we're not going to have a pretty big expense that we're going to need to, and that was the basis of my question before.
Sure.
Is we've got to do something and spend some money, significant money, fairly soon, one way or another.
Is there a specific season where this installation would have to take place? Would it have to take place in the summer just because of frost or because of avoiding interference with the teams participating in the fall? Or is there a specific time frame?
They generally, yeah, like putting in a chart, they generally happen in the summertime. It doesn't mean it has to happen then, but generally that would be the best time to do it.
Right, just an important timeline piece of it as we're talking about it.
Any other questions?
I have one.
Yes.
What about turf injuries and all that stuff? Are they more prominent with younger kids and stuff, or do the injuries are more severe on turf than they are on grass and stuff like that? I know there used to be a lot of.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and that could be a pro or a con. Like Robert was going to say, there are different studies out there. Some could say that, you know, one of the biggest maintenance issues with a turf field is maintaining the infield to a proper Gmax level. And a Gmax is they test when they'll hold a football helmet 36 inches, or I think it's 36, off the ground and drop it. How hard is that helmet hitting the ground? So with the newer synthetic surfaces, those Gmax ratings are fairly similar to grass. A synthetic turf surface probably is safer than a worn field in October. You know, a grass field in October. Maybe not the first day of practice. So there are different things. Abrasion, and you know, when you cut with your foot in the ground, the infill has to be right so your foot doesn't get stuck. So there have been studies that show that there might be more ACL injuries on a synthetic surface, but there are more limiting injuries on a grass field. Other studies would show something opposite. So we're kind of waiting, and it's been nice that Burn just put a field in 2016, so they have an extensive list. And there's 3 big studies being done as we sit here. One's out of California, and then there's 2 others being done right now. So the longer these surfaces are out there, the more information we get. But it's a concern, and it's something to look at. But right now, I guess the best thing to say is there doesn't seem to be a real difference.
Well, maybe just, Jacqueline, not to put you on the spot, I know it's not what you're here to talk about, but do you have any experience between turf fields versus grass fields with injuries?
Yes.
Being a trainer?
Chris was correct. There are some studies out there indicating that ACL injuries are more prevalent on turf fields, but the main concern actually is MRSA. So it's a form of staph infection that has difficulty being treated, or sometimes is actually not treatable by antibiotics. And that would be, for me and the athletic training department, the main concern with the implementation of the turf field. Now, as Chris mentioned before, because I know we've had some conversations about this, the UV rays does kill some germs as well as cleaning, but that still doesn't fully prevent the potential for an athlete to get a turf burn and have it be infected by MRSA, which MRSA can result in some serious life-changing and life-altering injuries. So it's something to consider.
So it's similar to what you'd see in wrestling mats and
Correct.
locker rooms, and it's another maintenance issue of keeping the turf clean.
Any other questions related to this? So we have a motion on the floor, which is essentially to authorize the staff to go forward with a feasibility study. To paraphrase that correctly? Yeah, preliminary study. For a turf field at Natowich Field. Are we ready to vote on that? All right. Yeah. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstentions? Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you very much. So I thought, and I wasn't putting you all off, I just know that we're talking fields, so I thought we'll kind of dovetail the two field things together and then we'll get to the presentation from athletic training. Sorry. So I'm going to turn, you both came to speak to us tonight, and it's related to a field space and the most within the grandstand in baseball, I'm assuming being Team Tenney. So.
Sure, yeah. I'm here to represent Team Tenney. My name's Devin Rhodes. I come here today with a letter that was sent to the school board that has failed to be acknowledged, so I'm going to read it aloud. It says, Dear BUHS District 6 School Board members, on December 20th, 2016, the following was posted on the Brattleboro Historical Society Facebook page. Survey for BUHS Grandstand, we need your help. The grandstand at Tenney Field has been a fixture of BUHS number 6 for many decades. First built in the 1930s, it has been a site for countless school and community activities. Unfortunately, over time, the structure has deteriorated and now is in poor repair. In addition to structural issues, the facility is not compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act and is no longer in public use. Renovation for this structure would be very expensive and would divert resources from pressing educational needs. Bearing the drive to raise funds through the community, we plan to remove the structure in the next 2 years. At this time, we welcome your thoughts on the disposition of the grandstands. Please direct your comments and suggestions to Steve Perrin, BUHS principal. With the understanding that this survey is not binding on the school board in the town of Brattleboro or the voters WSCSU, we are seeking community input on how to proceed with the grandstands. In July of 2017, Team Tenney Incorporated was founded with the goal of preserving and restoring the historical grandstands at Stolte Tenney Field. Members of our organization have attended meetings of BUHS number 6 Finance Committee and BUHS number 6 School Board on multiple occasions beginning August 2017. Team Tenney has been in contact with the Vermont Department of Historical Preservation and the Preservation Trust of Vermont. In December 2017, staff members of Vermont Department of Historical Preservation conducted a survey of Stolte Tenney Field grandstands and concluded that there's no structural issues present which would prevent the preservation and restoration of the historical grandstands. In February 2018, Team Tenney made a formal application to the Vermont Department of Historical Preservation to list the Stolte Tenney grandstands as a historical site. March 29th, 2018, meeting of the Brattleboro BUHS number 6 Finance Committee, Team Tenney made a proposal for it to make repairs to the grandstands so that it could be open to the public before the start of the 2018 BUHS baseball season. This proposal included the following: repairing and painting the grandstand backstop, replacing up to 1/3 of the planks which serve as seating, installing 2 handrails down the center of the 2 central walkways, pouring concrete on the front walkway to raise it to the level of the first step of the seating area to allow for wheelchairs to turn around, constructing pressure-treated stairs over the existing concrete stairs on the east side, visitor side of the grandstands, and constructing a pressure-treated ramp over the existing concrete stairs on the west side, home side of the grandstand. The labor and material for this project were to be donated at no cost to the school district and taxpayers. Representing local contractors, Dave Manning of Dave Manning Incorporated and Mike Renault of Renault Brothers Incorporated, were prepared to carry out the planning and to oversee the completion of the work for this proposal. On April 2nd, 2018, BUHS Finance Committee voted 3-1 to turn down this proposal made by Team Tenney. Team Tenney has respectfully requested the full school board, BUHS number 6, to review and approve Team Tenney's proposal to repair the grandstands so it can be used for the 2018 BUHS baseball season. And this is well before, so that's out of the question now, but we just come back hoping that you can review this once again. We have plenty of support. Once our Facebook page was started, we got instant support. We have over 250 members liking our page now. We have a host of fundraising opportunities that we have lined up, and we just want some concrete dates and numbers, because numbers seem to have been floating. And all this talk with turf football field, I'm not against it, but all this money is being allocated towards it while Tenney Field has seen a new scoreboard that doesn't work, and that's about it, other than routine maintenance. I have another letter as well that was written to us from a former player and opposing coach. He says, "I'm in full support of this worthwhile endeavor. As far as I'm concerned, the baseball grandstands at BUHS is a historic building and should be maintained and preserved forever. Dating back to the days of the old Northern League and beyond, many great baseball players, including major leaguers, even a Hall of Famer, Robin Roberts, have played in front of fans sitting in those very stands. I, myself, have many fond and unforgettable memories playing and watching games from the grandstands. Those stands are a part of Brattleboro's identity. For most baseball fans and players I know, associate the grandstands as an iconic landmark in town. Teams and players love to come to Tenney Field to play ball, and one of the reasons is that wonderful and historic grandstand. As a baseball coach at Mount Anthony and a former player at BUHS and the Northern League, I can vouch for the respect and admiration that current and former players have for those stands. Imagine how upset Red Sox fans would be if the administration decided to tear down the Green Monster or even the entire park to build a new one. The fans would have no part of that. There would be such an uproar against the idea that it would have to be dismissed, while administration would argue that the brand new ballpark would have greater seating capacity and knew everything would be wonderful. Red Sox Nation would have no part of it. Why? The reason is that the iconic ballpark with much history and memories that a new ballpark could never duplicate. When players are asked what their favorite park is to play in, Fenway is the number one response. The reason is historical. Likewise, players who come to Tenney Field are aware of the history of the park and the grandstands and relish of the thought of playing there. For most, it's their favorite place to play. Why? The reason is history. If the grandstands were removed, Tenney Field would just be another ho-hum ballpark without a signature and unique seating structure. That would be a disgrace in my opinion. My guess is that people who are advocating the removal of the grandstands have little or no knowledge of the history behind it. If those stands could talk, they could do a much better job at conveying the value and keeping them rather than destroying them. I sincerely hope that you are successful in your efforts to stop the destruction of this wonderful grandstands. Good luck. And that's written by Pete LaFlamme.
I know that in the Finance Committee, this has been discussed multiple times. Greg, do you want to?
I can update you a little bit there. On October 22nd, we sent a letter, which I assume you folks have received. In the past, it's been indicated that Team Tenney would be part of or all of a fundraising effort to raise money to do the work where we decide to do it. And we sent a letter asking to get some kind of an idea of the timeline and the fundraising goal amount that they might have come up with to proceed, if we were to proceed with this. So I don't know if you've had a chance to review that yet, but.
Yeah, we've looked it over, but one of the things is your numbers keep changing, your dates keep changing, so it's hard for us to get funds from community members without having a solid date for them to know what's going on, when it's going on, and whatnot. They don't want to give money when they don't know when any possible destruction would be happening.
Well, the number is up for discussion. That could vary somewhat. Yes, we had a couple of different numbers. We don't have a firm number, but it would be helpful if we kind of knew what kind of support we have for such an activity from Team Tenney. And I would think that if there are people that are supportive and willing to help out, that it might not matter whether it's this year or next year, they still would be willing to help out. As we get into the budget process, again, we want to factor this into our thinking on the capital plan. As you can understand, we would want to.
So it sounds like there's definitely some discussions that still need to continue to happen. And I know that when we've talked about it at the finance committee level, there's been, some questions about some things and what does meet ADA compliance and what doesn't, and some of those kinds of things too. So we were having some of those conversations, and to me, part of the discussion too is related to the field space usage that we talked about earlier, and the wear and tear, and what's available and what's not available too. So I think that, to me anyway, those two things are kind of connected, which is why it's interesting that everyone's here tonight to have that conversation, because to me those two things are connected from the way I understand it, and the field usage and wear and tear on fields and things like that, that's intense for everybody over our current situation.
Right, and like I read, we proposed to repair, renovate, and restore, and it was voted down.
Well, and I think and I can't speak for everybody on the committee, I think at the time when it was voted down by the committee, there was still too many unknowns at that time for us to decide to, yes, please, as community members, put a bunch of time and effort into this, because if it was, I know that there's some conversations about having some engineering studies and stuff done to it too, that if it was inevitable that it needed to come down because of structural issues, why put work and effort into something like that? And at the time, I know that was part of my consideration at that time, was because why have you all put a bunch of time and effort into stuff if we agreed to do that, if in a year from now it's going to have to come down for structural reasons because the underneath isn't solid,
Right. And we had it looked over, as I read, so I would like it to be reviewed once more, is what I'm getting at.
Well, it sounds like the finance and building, because as we talk about it in finance and buildings, we're going to continue to be talking about it. So.
How long ago was that assessment done?
February.
Of this year?
Mm-hmm. No structural issues present would prevent the preservation and restoration.
Who assessed the structure?
The Vermont Department of Historical Preservation.
That was a committee of that organization, wasn't it, that you actually worked with?
Yeah, but we worked with them as a whole to get it historically preserved.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to speak for the whole finance committee, but I would think we would, as as we do our budget, which we're starting next week, and our capital plan, that we would once again either reaffirm our position or see if in light of new variables that we would reconsider. And then we will recommend to the board as part of our budget. It would be part of the budget, so then the budget will either go or not go, and then it'll go to the public as a budget. And the budget, of course, is not, individual items aren't considered at the meeting. Recommendations could be made in public input, but the budget is voted on as a total, either up or down or a different total.
I guess that's what I don't understand, if this project is a collaboration between Team Tenney and the town or people that we represent, how do we know what we're responsible for, what piece of that pie we're responsible for?
Our position right now at this point is we are not going to take that on and put it in our capital plan or budget. And it would be, if something were to proceed, it would be as a result of the fundraising spearheaded by Team Tenney. And that doesn't mean we automatically would go for that either, because as Ricky said, there's field space considerations, and it might not just be strictly a here we can raise this amount of money, but if there is widespread public support for it, it would perhaps change our thinking at some point.
And I think we've already proven that there's widespread support.
Well, okay.
This all started with the Historical Society Facebook post that didn't get any traction, but once we started our own page, it blew up, and with widespread support, with over 250 members, which, you know as well as I do, most of the support within town, people aren't on Facebook.
I have a question too, is are you going to put money aside for you guys to tear it down? Are you going to put that in the budget?
That's yet to be determined whether it would be in this coming year's budget. This is the budget we're starting for July 1st.
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out, whether we should go ahead, and if you're going to start putting money in a way to tear it down, what's the, I just don't understand why we can't reach some kind of an agreement, if we're really willing to put the work in, and if you're going to do, a lot of it was based on whether you're going to put the artificial turf in. Now you're thinking about putting the artificial turf in, so now we're in limbo for the next 2 or 3 years or whatever. So that building sits there with nothing being done to it for the last few years, but then they only put the sign up, you can't use it, maybe a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, you decide we're going to shut it down. And now we're in the same place. We don't know whether we should raise money. You're going to put money in the budget possibly to tear it down because you want to tear it down. And that's the way we look at it, as you guys want to tear it down. It's not necessarily.
And I just say too that I don't think that there's a desire to tear it down. There's a desire to see what's in the best interest of the school, the athletic departments, and the community. And I know that for over a year I've been hearing radio ads saying that we've decided to tear it down. And that's not something that we've ever said.
Going to the meetings is they want to tear it down, basically.
It was blocked off with no acknowledgement, no
Right, they put a
warning.
sign up
Right.
so you can't use it anymore.
And that was my understanding is that, and Robert, you could correct me,
because it was
deemed unsafe.
I mean, it's a federal law. ADA is a federal law. I can't.
You got your report out in 2009, basically, saying that they were not safe or whatever.
No, the word not safe never was in that.
So when did it become unsafe?
It doesn't meet ADA compliance, was the crux to it. Then the stairs separated from the building. Then I witnessed some events that happened that I deemed to be, well, number one, it wasn't ADA compliant, but people that were trying to enter the stands, just the act of trying to get up there placed the people that were trying to get up there in a situation where they could be injured. So my responsibility to the community, if I see that and I recognize that, is to do something. And I did something. And then the conversation can begin with the community on what they want to do with it. That's not under my way above me. My job is just to protect the people that use the structure. So I will say the school board in 2010 allotted $35,000 to me to make improvements to the building, which I did because of safety concerns, especially for small children with a fall hazard.
Wasn't there also $50,000 last year in the school budget for the grandstand?
Not that I'm aware of. Not for that.
Or the year before, one of them, there was $50,000 for that too. In the school budget, or the financial budget, or whatever, it says grandstand, $50,000.
It goes back to it just being turned a blind eye to as well. It was neglected for years. It was run down. It wasn't being maintained at all. So it forced your hand in blocking it off, yes, but it wasn't properly maintained.
Well, there was a building project of $55.7 million that happened during this time.
Okay.
The money was all tied up in there, and then the idea was at that time, because I was there, that once that all took place, which ended in 2007, that we would look at the outside, do a study on what we wanted to do with the sports field, because there was a lot of cutbacks, because the original project, I believe, came in at $75 million to do everything, so they pared it down to 55.7. So there's only so much money you can spend.
Yeah, but we're just talking about the little stuff.
And it was,
The painting,
35,000 was
the
small
painting,
stuff.
Taking care of the benches and all that stuff.
We take care of the benches, and you can talk to Craig Bankston. We're constantly buying lumber for him and replacing those wooden benches. Routinely, every year. The back, you'll notice that the back has all been painted. I had custom-made gutters put on the back because the water was coming in and causing problems.
There was some of that report that came out from Stevens that you guys addressed because you had to, and then the rest of it was just gone.
Right, it's been neglected and it's only getting worse. So we want to jump on it as soon as possible.
Sean, did you have something you wanted to say? Or is that? Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
That's it. Well, I think that what I've heard is you all want to move on this. The Finance Committee will be talking about this because we're starting the budget process next week. And that's part of the process. Because to answer your question, you're like, are you putting in the money in the budget to tear it down? We don't know anything yet about what's in the budget, because we're just starting the budget process next week. So we can't say yes or no to that because we don't know. So I think that everybody on the Finance Committee has heard you, administration has heard you, and we're going to be beginning our process, the first steps in this process next week. And we can't give you an answer one way or the other today because there is a process that we have to go through.
Well, actually, I could say something. We made it very clear, I believe, at the Finance Committee that we do not have the luxury of investing a lot of money in the grandstands. There are a lot of financial needs that have to be met. So we made, I believe we voted at the Finance Committee that we would not be investing money in the grandstands.
Right.
Because we had so many other.
That's not what we're asking.
But you were going to tear it down for the
No,
$300,000 or
tearing it down-
$400,000 it's going to cost to tear it down.
No, I think you're wrong there.
That's not what we're asking.
At all the Finance Committee meetings that I met, which is every one except maybe one, there was never a mention about the demolition of the grandstands.
Never?
As it would actually happen.
There were
It would
cost
never
estimates.
happen. We talked about it, but we never set a date, we never set aside money in order to do that, so.
And that cost
And
actually came from
and
different
the
studies.
reason that it was
What?
taken out of service
That cost
was for
actually
the
came from different
ADA.
studies.
I mean, you have to follow the ADA compliance, and that is the reason it was taken out of service.
When we first went there was nothing mentioned about ADA compliance or what. It was just shut down. And then all of a sudden now the ADA comes out and all this stuff, which we knew that it has to be done and all that stuff. But originally it was going to be tore down, and that's the only reason the committee was formed in the first place.
All right, well, I think we have a process in place. And obviously this will be a continuing discussion as we go through our process in finance and moving forward. And we'll go from there. Anybody else have any questions for that? All right, thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so moving on, also under new business is presentation from the athletic trainer and the athletic training department. So we up here at this table are going to move out of your way so you can take over.
Okay.
All right?
Sure.
Call us back to order after our recess at, what is that, 8:13 it looks like? And I'll turn it over to Steve.
Great. So thank you for your patience. We had a little battery dying, but we're glad that we're back. So Jacqueline Penson has been our athletic trainer for the past 3 years, and I would love to capture everything she does, but I could not. She does an amazing job. She's a medical professional, she's a counselor, she's a therapist, she's all of that and more. And so I've asked her to come here and talk a little bit about what she does on a daily basis, and also a little bit about what an athletic trainer does, because we have a visual in our mind about what we think a trainer does, but I think it's important for you to hear what Jackie does and the range of her expertise and the range of her duties. So without any delay, Jackie, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. So hello everybody. I was really very excited when I was asked to speak to you all today. I'm always filled with joy and frankly filled with honor and passion when I'm asked to speak on behalf of my profession. Athletic trainers are very unique in nature, and most people still don't know what our profession actually entails. As athletic trainers, we all joke about and we have our elevator speech because most of the time people associate us very closely with personal trainers, which is actually not the case. So I'm excited to go into some detail with you about what an athletic trainer does. So if you ever encounter us on the road of healthcare, you know how we can help you. So I'm going to move swiftly from here on in. So we'll just jump right into it. So here's a quick overview in which we will define the profession of athletic training and what services we can offer, as well as how we communicate and who we communicate with in the community. We will then apply what we learn to this learn the specific care and apply that to what I do here at BUHS. So here's a little bit of my personal background of education and what I have done in terms of graduating from BUHS in 2009. And I'm also a KSC, Keene State College graduate of 2013, and I have been board certified since then as a fully certified and licensed athletic trainer in the state of Vermont and New Hampshire. In terms of availability, I'm always available before, during, and after practices. If you'd like to schedule an appointment with me, mornings are the best. Athletic trainers are highly qualified, multi-skilled healthcare professionals who collaborate with physicians to provide preventative services, emergency care, clinical diagnosis, therapeutic intervention, and rehabilitation of injuries and medical conditions. Athletic trainers work under the direction of a physical a physician as prescribed by state licensure and statutes. So here are the 5 domains of athletic training that we will discuss today. So the first domain is injury, illness, and prevention. Athletic trainers are educated and trained in injury, illness, and prevention strategies that focus on optimizing health to improve an individual's quality of life. We're the only healthcare providers whose expertise are not only in prevention, but ranges from minor sprains and strains to catastrophic injuries and minor illnesses all the way up to exertional heat stroke. We also specialize in nutrition because we know that plays an integral role in healthcare in general. So some things that we do are pre-screenings in the beginning of seasons of athletes and patients, depending on what setting we're in, which includes pre-participation physical exams, musculoskeletal flexibility, strength, and endurance assessments, cardiovascular fitness, postural and ergonomics of the workspace, and we design and implement emergency action plans to ensure medical personnel are prepared in an emergency situation. And we obtain and interpret environmental conditions and patient data, such as weather conditions, hydration, status of patients. We also make appropriate recommendations for safety protocols in terms of if a player or a sport should be able to continue or if an activity should be suspended. We educate patients and coaches and parents on the importance of acclimatization, fluid and electrolyte balance as well to prevent heat stroke. We inspect facilities to ensure they're free of hazards and are sanitary, as well as maintain athletic equipment and make sure they are properly up to safety standards. We educate and advise nutrition based on physical activity, proper overall for proper maintaining of a healthy lifestyle. Athletic trainers often are the first point of contact for physically active people, and we educate about dietary needs related to amount and type of physical activity. We effectively explain the difference of carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and minerals, and we can refer appropriately to medical professionals if a patient needs more in-depth service. We identify and explain illnesses attributed to poor nutrition, and we advise the patient. We also educate patients on performance of enhancing substances and we also understand FDA regulations of dietary products. We are also in communication with our patients about substance or alcohol abuse and performance enhancing and improper dietary habits. Under the second domain, we are educated to examine patients who have acute, subacute, or chronic musculoskeletal disorders and medical conditions, and to arrive at a differential diagnosis regarding suspected pathologies. Based on this assessment, we can determine the impairments, functional limitations, and disabilities that result of these injuries and illnesses. Examination is an ongoing process focused on meeting and changing the needs of patients. So I'm just going to mention a few examples here. We perform comprehensive examinations. We obtain thorough medical history, including an assessment of underlying systemic disease and consideration of its potential contributing factors. We conduct physical examination, including observation of the patient and performing functional assessment, as well as neurological and vascular abnormalities we screen for. And we include various special tests that don't require X-ray or MRI to determine if one is potentially needed. We recognize the roles of medications in the management of orthopedic injuries as well as medical illnesses in all domains that we'll be talking about today. And we also communicate the findings on the exam with the patients, parents, sometimes coaches, as well as other healthcare professionals that need to be integrated as deemed appropriate. Under Domain 3, we're educated and trained to provide standard immediate emergency care. Again, I'm just going to mention a couple examples here. We implement appropriate emergency action plans and management strategies, which involve us and are not limited to CPR, AED and splinting use, intubation and advanced airway techniques, control of body temperature, the use of epinephrine or for anaphylaxis, and administering IVs. We can perform a secondary assessment to employ the appropriate management strategies for non-life-threatening injuries or illness, including head and physical traumas, environmental illness, seizures, acute asthma, different types of shock, thoracic, respiratory, and internal organ injury or illness, acute musculoskeletal injuries, spinal cord and peripheral nerve injuries, diabetic emergency, toxic drug overuse, allergic thermal and chemical reactions of the skin. And from all of that, we can determine and diagnose while coming up with a differential diagnosis. Under the fourth domain, after assessment and diagnosis, we then come up with treatment goals and therapeutic intervention to reduce the extent of the patient's disability and modify accordingly, and discharge the patient once treatment goals are met. Some examples of manual therapy that we give are techniques to restore joint range of motion and muscle extensibility, exercises to improve strength, endurance, speed, and power and agility, proprioception and neuromuscular control and coordination, sport-specific and functional exercises. We also are pretty handy at other modalities such as thermal agents, electrical stimulation, therapeutic ultrasound, mechanical techniques such as traction, and therapeutic laser. We also recommend fit and splint with durable medical equipment as we deem appropriate, or if it's ordered by a physician. And like I said, we're also good with ergonomics of the workspace. So if you're having neck pain while sitting at your desk typing all day, we can come in and actually help you and adjust the way your working space is to limit your pain and hopefully increase your work capacity throughout the day. We also provide patient education to implement home exercise plans as necessary. Now, on the right side, in a clinical setting, you might see us first assisting in an OR or operating room, applying casts or sutures, or assisting the doctor with evaluation, along with reading MRIs and x-rays. Domain 5, athletic trainers possess the skills necessary to develop, administer, and manage a healthcare facility associated with venues that provide healthcare services. Athletic trainers have the skill to set and utilize human, physical, and fiscal resources to provide efficient and effective healthcare services. We use evidence-based medicine, in which is the latest research in national healthcare recommendations and guidelines in our practice. We ensure compliance with state, federal, and accrediting agency policies related to healthcare, such as HIPAA, FERPA. We also document and practice appropriate infectious control, equipment safety, environmental hazard safety, and facility maintenance as mandated by OSHA. We also work closely with the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations and Accreditation Association of Ambulatory Care Act. When in the clinic, we do utilize standard coding and reimbursement practices for healthcare, such as ICD-9 and CPT codes. We maintain medical records that meet legal and regulatory standards, and we abide by federal, state, and local regulations for proper storage, transportation, and dispensing of all medical documentation. We develop and implement policies and procedures related to employment, fiscal management, and operations of healthcare facility, including, like I said before, emergency action plans, risk management plans, operation and capital budgets, and programs compliant with federal statutes and regulations such as Title IX, the Civil Rights Act, ADA, the Buckley Amendment, Medicare, and CMS. We can fit into so many different settings, as you can see here, based on our skill set and our physician orders. Athletic trainers have the skills and knowledge to perform formal casting, splinting, x-ray, MRI reading, and act as a first assist in the OR, like I mentioned before, when working in an orthopedic setting. With our ability to perform systemic evaluation, you might also see us in family medicine or primary care provider facilities. With time and experience, athletic trainers continue to learn and grow with their practice. So my regulations directly relate to the national scope. There are no restrictions that apply in the state of Vermont. or New Hampshire. And like I said, some states specifically allow more or less to be performed in the ATC scope of practice. However, an ATC's ordering physician can expand an athletic trainer's scope of practice regardless of state regulations when they are practicing under that physician's license. For example, in the state of Vermont, if someone were to come off the field with a shoulder dislocation, I would have one attempt to relocate a shoulder. I specifically work under Dr. McClarney at Brattleboro Memorial Hospital. Under her physician orders, whether blood circulation is compromised or not, and if the patient is comfortable, I'm actually allowed 2 attempts to relocate that joint to enhance their comfort before transferring them or deciding if they can return to play or not. While I'm proficient at intubation, suturing, and casting, that is not currently in with my standing orders at BUHS. What I will say, though, is that we always hold a final say when returning an athlete to play. Even if a doctor's note is present to clear them, we can still always act more conservative than the doctor. However, once we have a doctor's note restricting someone from play, we cannot break that order. The only exception to that is us becoming in direct contact with the physician and having a conversation based on our evaluation and their evaluation to see if the orders need to be adjusted. In terms of communication, these are other types of people that athletic trainers communicate with on a regular basis. It's my personal belief that the more open we are and transparent with communication to people who need to be notified about an injury, the better care we can give. So more offered services here at BUHS, and I do, Katie Miller is one of our Keene State athletic training students. I also have another one named Brendan, who I forgot to add on the slides. While I'm not naming the 5 domains here, each aspect, besides the Keene State interns, encompass the 5 domains in each point, including medical records. Until Keene State College closes their athletic training program, I usually have 1 to 2 Keene State student athletic training interns who I teach during the school year. And actually, Keene State College pays us each semester, or at the end of the year, for each student that we teach. While they are here, they do practice directly under my license and certification. While they are a help and very knowledgeable, they are here to learn and observe me and practice skills that I believe they can perform to my level. While I am one person, it is part of my job to cover all games and practices. When there are multiple practices going on at once, athletic trainers like myself, we use statistical and epidemiological studies of injuries to determine the most dangerous sport occurring and who has the highest incident rate of injury to choose which practice takes priority. I always make it a point to stop by at least once a day to everybody's practices, irregardless of that fact, just to check in to see if the coaches or players need anything and to update them on how all of their athletes are doing. All the athletes are able to see me for injury evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment during, before, and after practices and games, as long as it's past 3:30. Over the past 3 years, I have been here. I've created a field-specific emergency action plan for each field, as well as I've helped implement the Anyone Can Save a Life program, which does not certify coaches in CPR, but it does show layperson CPR and how to use an AED. During the event of a heat illness, while it is within my scope to administer a rectal temperature and give urine analysis, most high schools, including BUHS, do not administer them. We utilize the patient education on hydration, as well as NATA guidelines on how to treat illness without a rectal thermometer. One other thing that I have done while I've been here is noticed that there were not enough AEDs out on the campus of BUHS. For every minute that the AED does not arrive, the chances of survival goes down by 10%, which is quite a bit. And to think about where my office is downstairs, all the way up to Familari, that's a couple minutes. So what I did do was I applied for a grant, and we got approved, and I was able to get an AED, so that way we have one AED down near Fort Dummer and Familari at all times. It's kept in the shed. What I would like to see with my continuation here is more AEDs on the fields, which I have been continually applying for grants for. So that's a work in progress. And then referral process here at BUHS. So just speaking as me, I'm a very open person, and I firmly believe a huge aspect of providing excellent healthcare along with education is realizing when you don't know something and admitting it. Something that I pride myself in my practice is telling you that I am human, I'm not perfect, or a doctor. But what I do specialize in, and what all athletic trainers should specialize in, is finding specifically specialized people that we can refer you to if we don't know the answers. Being one athletic trainer for such a large school, sometimes I have seen 45 kids, 45 athletes in 50 minutes, trying to get them out to practice on time. If I find that your athlete or an athlete needs more in-depth rehab or attention, while I might be equipped education-wise and training-wise to give, I still realize that I have too many athletes per myself, and the best thing for that athlete would be to refer them to a specialist or physical therapist who can give more time. There are many specialists in the community that I've had the pleasure of working with and have gotten close to, who have helped many athletes at this school fully recover and return to their sport. I do have a nutrition plan that I designed, and I do have a handout here that I always offer every team and every team member. I talk to teams as a whole in the beginning of the season about hydration and how to check to see if they're hydrated. I'm always trying to stress to coaches the importance of getting to know their athletes for the purpose of knowing that if someone is diabetic or has asthma or severe allergies. If an athlete has a pre-existing condition, I always encourage an extra prescription of whatever they might need to be filled and placed in the med kit. While I read through everyone's medical forms, I do encourage, especially new athletes, to personally introduce themselves to me and have a quick discussion and a rundown on their condition so I can put a name to a face and get to know them. On a whole, I encourage education not only between the coach and athlete, but the coach, athlete, parent, and myself. Also, I try to teach coaches signs of heat illness and other possible medical conditions if they were to have someone with a special consideration on their team. Following the National Athletic Training Association guidelines, everyone for concussion must have a baseline that's given once a year. We use here the impact testing. It's one of the top and most common computerized testing used. I do, however, utilize two other physical forms of concussion assessment if need be, called the SCAT-5 or the BESS. One assesses balance, one's more memory-based physical test that I give one-on-one when helping to determine if someone can be returned to play for a concussion. A rule of thumb that all ATCs, including myself, follow and that we must abide by is if you hit your head and it leads to a headache, it equals a concussion, which most people don't know. Believe it or not, it can take 12 to 24 hours for symptoms to be present, even if an athlete has no reporting symptoms after hitting their head. But if they clearly had a mechanism of injury, so if they clearly hit their head, they stumbled off the field, they got up slowly, they're shaking their head, etc., and they need an evaluation here at BUHS, it is well within my discretion, even if they're not reporting symptoms, to hold them from play. Barring that, there are many gray areas in terms of fuel and dehydration that could play a role, which I always take into fair consideration when discussing what's going on with an athlete. So 2 dangers of returning to play with concussion, which I highly stress to all athletes and coaches, is second impact syndrome. So if someone were to hit their head and continue playing, they actually have a 25% chance that if they hit their head again, it could cause sudden death. Post-concussive syndrome is another syndrome that can occur where if you return to play too soon with concussion, you could actually have long-term or lifelong symptoms, which could lead to CTE, which, if anybody's seen the movie Concussion with Will Smith, we all know about. In diagnosing concussions, there used to be a grading system that is no longer standard of practice, but patients can experience more mild or severe symptoms on the concussion spectrum. So when someone does get a concussion, there's many steps that have to be in place when providing care for an athlete that I have implemented here at BUHS. I always give a 24-hour care handout to the parent, and I always make sure I speak one-on-one with the parent and athlete in the room or on the phone. I always instruct nothing except for Tylenol for 24 hours, and believe it or not, lots of rest and sleep, which I know some people think, oh, well, if you have a concussion, you should stay awake. Actually, that's not true. Lots of sleep is actually very good for the brain. No physical activity, including home exercise and physical education classes. I always instruct the athlete or patient on proper eating. I find that in my clinical practice, a low sugar diet actually helps with higher fats, helps with the healing process of a concussion. I'm always in contact with the nurses and teachers to alert them for accommodations, such as no time tests, less homework, sunglasses used throughout the day, multiple breaks to the nurse for Tylenol and rest, whatever we can do to limit their symptoms throughout the day while they're returning to learn. Daily check-ins are required with me, and the athlete cannot return to play by a physician note. They have to be cleared by the ATC. For return to play, once they are 24 hours symptom-free with a normal physical examination and baseline impact test scores, they begin a National Athletic Training 6-day return to play process, which I do have another handout for if people are interested in looking. So this is just my statement that I like to abide by here at BUHS. I feel that it's important to always act with integrity in the best care, with the best possible care of the patient in mind at all times. Any questions?
Any questions? What kind of insurance you got?
The school's insurance?
Liability insurance, the school?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes.
Just a question about in the mornings. You mentioned this in the beginning. I wasn't sure if it was like, because I know mornings were pretty available for us to come see you during tryout week. But during the school day,
So,
are you here in the morning?
So
Yeah.
during the school day, what I try to do is keep kids in school as much as possible. Their priority needs to be in class, with the exception of if it's emergent. Or if it's a senior who has a block off in the morning, I will make special considerations to see them in the morning if need be. But anytime a parent needs a meeting, I'm more than happy to schedule a morning meeting with them. Any more questions?
Jackie's day can go as late as, depending on the winter sports season, it can go pretty late in the night. So she's not normally here at 8:45.
Correct.
Because her day is kind of flexed because she does spend a lot of time on the fields, on the court, late at night. So
Yeah, and weekends too, when there's games, I'm also here. So if people need to catch me, sometimes a weekend game, you can come grab me during a home game. Any other questions?
I will make one observation. I saw you in action. You were dealing with one injury, and while you were dealing with one, another one happened at the other end, and you were trying to deal with both of them.
Yes, we
And
had
I
a
watched
broken
you,
arm
and I
and a
watched
broken
you
tibia.
run back and forth from one to the other. Yeah.
On during two separate games on two separate fields.
Yeah.
Yes.
Jackie, what's your average student load during the day? How many students do you see on a typical day?
On a typical day in height season, I can see up to 50 children. Between 3:30 to 4:15. And sometimes that gets a little lengthy if I can't get out to practice on time, but that's the time I try to cram it all in because coaches and players like to be out on time for practice.
Anything else?
I just I'd say as a student, like, Jackie's such an incredible resource for the student, and she does such a great job. Like, I'm always sad when I have to go to her place because that means I'm injured. But when I do, I always know that I'm going to get great care, and she just does a really great job managing the mass of students that comes to her.
It is chaotic
Yeah,
in that room.
chaotic.
It's a tiny room, like about the size of inside these tables, and they get it done, so. Yeah.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ricky, I can flip switches. I could get more light if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
You too. All right, so why don't we keep moving with our agenda and move into the consent agenda? Or maybe if you left them over on that side table, and if somebody wants to take them, they can do that. Sure. That'd be great. So when we move into consent agenda, and the first up, is there a motion to enter consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, so first up is finance, building, and transportation.
Okay, committee met on October 18th, and our first order of business was to approve warrants, numbers 1060, 61, and 64 through 66, in the amount of $161,851.98. Warrants from October 15th, numbers 1067, 70 through 72, and 76 and 77, in the amount of $386,786.63. We also worked on our budget timeline, and there is a complete schedule out for our meetings and which parts of the budget we'll be considering at those meetings. And we encourage the administration to develop a budget that reflects level service and does not exceed the education spending threshold to be established by the legislature for FY 2020. Motion approved. A little bit different than what we've said in the past, but along the same lines, level budget, level service. But really what it comes down to at the end of the day is the education spending threshold. We want to make sure we gear ourselves toward. We talked some about the long-term plan and the turf field potential, which we discussed here earlier today. And we also got an update from Frank on the net metering agreement that we have for electricity. And based on current rates, it's noteworthy that we will save more than $70,000 annually on our electric bill. And that's a tribute to Frank getting us set up in this net metering arrangement along with some other institutions. Our next meeting will be November 15th at 8 a.m. in the central office.
Thank you. WSCSU finance.
We met last Tuesday, I guess it was, and we went through our budget planning guide timeline, and with the ultimate goal of getting a WSCSU budget approved on December 5th. And we're meeting almost weekly between now and then. This coming Wednesday, their meetings are 5:15 on Wednesdays. We'll be going over the special ed budget, which will be the biggest single item on the WSCSU. We also got an update on the solar project that Woody talked about, and spent some time talking about all the requirements and the transition that'll take place with the Act 46 process coming in, and it's coming soon, and we'll hear more to know exactly what what we'll be doing. And my understanding in the budgets that we're approving is that each of the schools, each of the town boards and our board and the SU will go ahead with their normal budget planning process, even though we're not in normal times. And then ultimately the budget, if I get it right, is approved somewhere in this timeline later in the spring, in March, I think, in the new UUD or whatever it will be called. But we can't just wait to find out what's going and then start planning a budget in February or something like that. And there's also new accounting systems going, a little bit of need for personnel at the central office. And one thing that I'll say, and I'll keep it very short, is that what central office is doing and what Frank is doing and Lyle is doing through all of this is just remarkable. With all this turmoil and uncertainty going on, of just keeping a level head and planning and moving forward with great experience and composure, and keeping all of us in line as much as we allow them to do. But it's really impressive to see, so thank you.
Thank you. Planning and policy.
Has not met.
Teacher curriculum committee.
Has not met.
BAMS committee.
Has not met.
WRCC committee.
Has not met.
All right, so that's it for consent agenda. So is there a motion to accept consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Who seconded? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstentions? None. Okay, so we'll move to administrative reports. I'm gonna be nice to the students and let student council go first. So why don't you let us know what's going on with student council?
Awesome, thank you. So the student council just recently read through close to 60 applications, which is really great because it is probably at least 6 times the amount of applications we had last year, which means something's going well with publicity. A lot of this, I think, had to do with us going to advisories at the beginning of the year, and also freshman first day, speaking in front of the entire freshman class. We have, I believe, 10 new members, all of whom are freshmen and sophomores, which looks good for the future. Recently, we have met with Mr. Perrin, a group of the returning student council members mostly, to discuss the future of Long Block ACE, which we discussed a little bit last year. We will be tentatively talking to department heads on Wednesday morning, a group of 4 students, I believe Jackson and myself included, to discuss how we can best get this up and running, where it would satisfy both the teachers' wishes and the wishes of the student body. We are continuing our collaboration with the yachts team, which is a freshman class taught by Mr. Lord, and they work with basically getting student voice involved in our school community decisions, which is very similar to our purpose here. We will be beginning Feed the Thousands after break, and that is one of the big projects in the year. FBLA does the same thing, and we gather as much food as we can. There is a possible competition among grade levels to try to get as much food as we can and help out in that way. Similarly, we are going to be pegging down specific dates for student council volunteers to work at the overflow shelter, and we'll hopefully get the involvement of other students outside of student council to get involved, possibly for community service. We will be having elections for new positions in student council happening in January. The other very important thing to the school board and to the BUHS community as a whole is the discussion of the flag policy, the student voice flagpole. Last week we met, Jackson and I were there, as well as 2 other student council members, Sarah Gordon Macy and Katie Taggart, and several of the students involved in raising the Black Lives Matter flag, as well as several others who are strong voices to represent students at our school. We met with Mr. Perrin to discuss the flag policy proposal that you guys saw, the original draft of it. We had a very effective meeting in terms of figuring out ways to get around some of the really difficult issues with writing this policy in terms of the legal side of things, as well as making sure that everybody's voice is heard and students do not feel targeted or discriminated against in that regard. We will be continuing to discuss this because there's much more to be said, and that will hopefully be happening Friday morning. We will have the same group of students meet, and we will discuss more of the details, being how we are going to make up a group of students to determine whether these flags can be hung. We will continue editing the flag proposal to make sure that there are no kind of loopholes that could be a problem going forwards. And essentially we're working hard to see this up and running, as well as Long Block ACE. There's a lot going on right now, and it's exciting. We have so many new people and a lot of student awareness. If anybody has any questions, I give a lot of information about any of what I just said. Please feel free to ask.
Do we have any questions? Excellent, thank you so much. You're doing a lot of work, we really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for doing all that and taking those things on. It's great.
It's great to see students as involved in school in their school as you all are. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Why don't we move down the table to BAMS?
Hi everyone. Just a few events to update you on. We had our first school dance on Friday evening, Halloween theme, and Team Canis sponsored the event for all students. It was really, really fun. Simultaneously, we had 21 parents attend a kind of parent evening. We call it BAMS Community Connections, and Junie Pereira is our parent liaison, and it was really pretty low key this time. They played games, had ate food, had discussion, and it was a lot of fun. Great feedback so far on that. But Junie did a great job organizing all of that. Let's see, another fun event. We had our first pep rally in quite a while, recently, last week. This was a way, we started doing some honor roll assemblies and trying to recognize other students last year, but this was way better. I had a teacher who proposed, she wanted to work with our student leadership to create a fun event for kids and to celebrate things that are going well in the school. You really couldn't hear, it's a good way to go deaf by going into the gym during one of these things with 280 7th and 8th graders screaming. So they recognized fall athletes, beams, participants, things like that. And then we had some Hungry Hippo games, human Hungry Hippo, which was a lot of fun. And it was students against students, and then we did some staff and students, staff against the principals at the end. So it was kind of fun. Other events coming up, we have fall concerts this coming Wednesday at 7 p.m. and during the day there will be a show for our students and staff. Our parent-teacher conferences are happening this week. Teachers will be there late this Thursday evening. The last conferences wrap up at 7 p.m. And we do an online sign up now, and that's going very well. So these are all things where I'm happy to report on. One kind of downer, Christy Thuralt's been at BAMS I don't know if it's been BAMS the entire time, I think so, over 20 years, and she has submitted her letter of resignation effective November 16th. She's a paraprofessional. She's going to be working at Brattleboro Retreat full time. She got a so she's pretty excited about that, but sad to be leaving us at the same time. So you guys probably had this tea if you went to BAMS.
None of us would.
No, none of you. All right. Yeah, I don't recognize it. So that's all I have, unless we have any questions.
Is this the student-led?
These are teacher-led, and we decided to do teacher-led in the fall and student-led in the spring. It was a little too early in the year for them to get PLPs all organized and ready to present in early November. So,
Thank you, Keith. Let's move to the high school.
Great, thank you. I feel like I've dominated a lot of the time here tonight. So I have a letter to share. Jim Nicholson, who's Jim and Lisa, they're Kaylee Nicholson's parents, and Kaylee was invited to sing the national anthem at our last football game on senior night. Kaylee's a senior this year, and a lot of people came together to help Kaylee do that, and she did a fantastic job. And her parents have written a letter. I'd like you to read it. I'll just pass it around. Thanking specific people, among them Steve Rice for helping her get ready to sing, the coaches for also helping her, and then the team in a spontaneous display of support came over and gave her high fives and did a great job. So I want to recognize that. Got that letter from Jim and Lisa. I wanted to share that with you. We have a few events coming up. Fall concert is next week. BUHS Fall Concert on the 14th. Steve Rice and Lisa Wadsworth have been working hard with the students to get them ready, and I'm sure they're going to do an incredible job as they normally do. This Thursday we have parent conferences from 2:30 to 7. Our parent portal opened up today to schedule appointments. We're using a program called Pick a Time. That's a change that we started last year, where instead of having parents wait in line for 45 minutes to an hour, we actually ask parents to schedule online so they can have some dedicated time with a teacher. We find it makes things a little less chaotic. One of the downsides is it does limit the time of the parent conference, and that's unfortunate, but we do encourage parents and teachers to arrange times for longer discussions if they need that. November 13th, we'll be doing a school safety meeting. We've invited the Brattleboro Police Department and the Brattleboro Fire Department to come. We're going to talk a little bit about our ALICE program, so parents have an understanding of what ALICE means, how that's not just a normal lockdown drill. We'll have the police share the town emergency response plan, and the fire department talk about their role as well, and also the role of Rescue Inc. in the case of a tragedy here at the high school. Tomorrow, our faculty will be getting that same presentation. Brattleboro Fire and Police will come and they'll work with our faculty to talk a little bit about the plan. And finally, I do want to recognize the great work that Student Council has done. Last Friday, we had a very robust discussion with those students and the students who originally petitioned to have the Black Lives Matter flag raised here at BUHS. And I think there were some tough conversations that happened. People were very respectful, very thoughtful, and I'm looking forward to continue working with them because they were incredible. And the work they did was certainly, it was hard work. We finished in a block and quickly realizing we need more time, so we're going to actually set aside most of Friday morning to have the conversation, and so we can go into more specifics. So I want to thank them publicly for their work, and also the students that aren't here today that helped raise the flag last year. Thanks.
Let's move to the Career Center.
Sure. Last board meeting, I had mentioned that our forestry program, we're about to compete in the Vermont Soils and Land Judging Competition in the state of Vermont. Well, with over 200 students competing, proud to say that our kids came in third place in the state in the competition. And also that the program and their instructor, Errol Nelson, should be congratulated for having 3 students in the top 20 also in the state. They're Kylie Smith from Vernon, placed 4. She did a great job. Nicholas Aiken from Putney, placed 13th, and Gabe Clark from Newfane, placed 16th. So, great job to them. Also during the Career Expo, the Southern Vermont Career Expo that took place in downtown Brattleboro on October 18th, we had our level 2 students attend that, bus them downtown so that they could get exposure as to what businesses we had in our community and what upcoming jobs within Southern Vermont were available to them coming up. And we tried to do that right at 1 o'clock as they were opening, so it was kind of free reign for them to go through. It ran from 1 to 5, but it was still pretty busy at the time they got there, so that worked out well. And also on October 23rd, we had the pleasure of having Deputy Secretary of Education Heather Boucher down to visit the Wyndham Regional Career Center. I spoke with her about the uniqueness of our center, gave her a tour of the center, and she, along with Emily Long, one of our representatives, were very impressed with the center and the programs that she visited. Yeah, so, had a great day. One final thing, construction program has begun constructing a tiny home for a local community member. The consumer has come forward to have the home constructed by WRCC students. The person has purchased a new trailer for that home that the home will be built on and will be funding the project up front. That has been advertised locally, an option for a community member, and the person has come forward and met our standards for what would be happening for that. So that's taking place also.
That's it. Excellent. Thank you. Central office.
I have nothing to add.
Okay. Okay. All right. And I don't have anything from my report, so I guess that moves us into unfinished business, which is discussion on the Black Lives Matter flag and the flag discussion. And there was a little bit of conversation about that in the administrative reports, but there was a desire to have this as a more of a discussion.
I would like, pending the finished draft of the new policy, to allow the Black Lives Matter flag to be returned to its position. Not the one that we have, because I understand it's in the lobby, but I will defer to Steve on this if this is a problem. I would hope that any further policy that we write would include a grandfather clause for anything that was approved prior to the policy. But our kids were very badly hurt from what I understand about how it was handled, and I would like to put it up pending a new policy.
Well, I'm curious what Steve, after the conversation last week, what Steve thinks and feels, and what the students talked about maybe.
I'll defer to the students that were there.
So you are saying you'd like us to add into the document we're creating that the Black Lives Matter flag continues to stay up?
I would like that any flag that precedes the approval of the policy be permitted to stay up. But you guys do understand we will have the final word on any policy, right? Mm-hmm. Like.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good.
Okay.
I appreciate the work that you're doing on it, and I'm glad that it's coming from a place of the students. But I've been hearing from a lot of folks that perhaps the way we handled it could have been done better. And I would like to remedy the situation because it's taking us appreciably longer to formulate a formal policy than we had anticipated. And I would like the flag to be re-raised pending whatever final solution to these problems that we come up with. Or I guess the final policy and answer would be a better term.
Okay, yeah, I think that many of the students who were involved in raising the flag, we also were the ones who were represented at that meeting on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
So that should be, we can bring that up in the following meeting, and I don't see a reason it wouldn't.
And you're asking that we return the flag
Before we finish the policy?
Yeah, you're asking that pending completion of that policy, that we raise the flag now.
Yes.
Okay.
That is what I'm asking on behalf of the students. Obviously, I wasn't at your meeting, but I've heard from some of their parents and from some of them and from some people who are just in sympathy. And
how would we?
Well, I think the board would make a decision tonight if they wanted us to return the flag. And then it would be raised And then whatever policy would be right, we would bring to the board and they would deliberate on that policy.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Is that consistent?
So,
I think it sounds like we need a motion. So,
Hang on before you do that.
so this is to re-raise the flag back on the main pole outside the school versus in the atrium outside the science hallway?
The one in the atrium will stay where it is.
Okay.
We'll
So
get-
an
we'll get
additional
another
flag.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. I think I'll be honest, that when I met with the students after the flag was lowered, they really appreciated it. And one student in particular said she felt that it meant more to have that flag in the atrium than it did outside. So I really think it should stay there, along with the LGBTQ flag. I think.
Right. Yep.
I think it's appropriate they stay there.
Yep. All right.
And we're talking about all three schools. Is that correct? Or are you just talking about BUHS?
We can talk about all three schools.
Okay.
That would be great.
Okay. I think Keith and Ray would like to know.
was it flown at all three schools prior
It was.
for that week and a half?
And last year, yes.
Yeah, I have a question, but I think before we continue with discussion, we should have an actual motion
Yeah.
on the floor.
Yes, I would like to make a motion that we, or actually, you could probably make, do you want to make it, or?
It's fine by me. I don't need glory. I just want it done.
Okay. That we direct the administration to go back to the original motion, which was to fly the Black Lives Matter flag on the three campuses and do it in a grandfather sense.
Second.
But one of the things, okay, we'll open the questions, but one of the things I heard Ann say was until completion of the new policy.
We may decide to leave it up after that, but we can decide now to have it up prior to any implementation.
Right, but I think that I would like to see the motion for tonight say, let's put them back up pending completion of the policy.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So maybe consider, is that okay to do a friendly amendment to that, to your motion, Sean? Until completion of the policy that's in process. Because who knows what it's gonna come up with, but I don't want us to limit or.
Could we have a quick review of who actually is producing the policy at this time?
Yeah.
I mean, normally it's planning and policy.
Right. So the process as I envision it is that a group of students and I will, and Mike Sostek's also part of this process, that we will draft a proposed policy. That policy will include criteria for a flag to be flown, and then along with that would be criteria that outline, because Ian talked about this in August, a committee composed of students and staff that would consider requests for flags to be flown. And then that committee would decide if a flag was appropriate to fly or not. Because Ian, I believe, said he didn't want the board to necessarily make those decisions. He thought
Yeah, we had discussed in our planning policy, setting up that committee.
that we have a committee of staff and students and administration that would consider those, and then they would make a decision. So the plan that I had was that we would craft that policy, and then this group would bring it to planning and policy for review.
I guess I've been thinking about this quite a bit, and it sort of seems to me that we were approached by some students last fall, or last, when was it?
Spring.
Last spring, thank you. And they made the presentation, and the motion was made to, at a subsequent meeting, to agree with them and to fly the Black Lives Matter flag on campus. And it passed, and there was no timeline. So I don't really understand coupling that initial endeavor with something that is going to happen in the future. So I think that goes to Ann's comment that it could be grandfathered. In other words, we made a decision to fly that flag, and I don't see why that has to be different. Why don't we just fly the flag?
Actually, now that you mention it, the original discussion was that the length of time was at the administration's discretion, so.
Was that a friendly? No, I don't think it was.
So. There was no set timeline, which means it was, we authorized it, we didn't order it. So the administration could, on that authorization, just continue to fly the flag if they wanted to.
So somebody asked Ian at that meeting, how long does the flag fly? And Ian's response was, we're not talking about how long, we're just saying it needs to be flown. And so.
Was this the board meeting you were referring to?
It was. And so then Keith, it was Mike Burnett and Lyle and I met and we kind of discussed, well, what did that mean? How long is that? And so we checked with other schools, among them Montpelier, and asked them how long, how long were they going to fly for? And they said the remainder of the year. So I believe Lyle came to a board meeting and did say that.
She did.
That it's going to fly for the balance of the school year. And so at that point, we then had the discussion in August about flying it at the beginning of the year. We had said we were going to wait until, and if I'm wrong, correct me, planning and policy said we were going to wait until there was a policy in place, because the original plan was to have a new flagpole, a student voice flagpole. Is that what we named it?
Yes.
So the board, the planning and policy had talked about not having it fly at all, but then we kind of, after further discussion, agreed that the reason why those students wanted the flag to fly was so they felt welcome at their school, and we didn't think it sent a very good message to say, well, you're not. So we agreed to fly it for the beginning of the school year. I believe that was my recollection of events, and that's how we got to where we are now.
Yes.
Is that?
We did,
Is that-
yes.
Okay.
We were going to take it down under sort of general advice of council and decided to leave it up at least for the beginning of the school year.
Right.
I feel it's taking us a long time to come up with this policy, and I would favor making our students of color feel comfortable again.
I agree with Dan totally on this.
Mike,
Okay, go Ian.
well, I have a question for Steve and for the students. Do you feel any compelling need for the flag to be flown on the flagpole in addition to being in the lobby? Is this even an issue for our students?
So when we had the meeting last week with, as I said, many of the students who worked to raise the Black Lives Matter flag, as well as some other student representatives, this did not come up because it was our understanding that it would be our job as students, including those who wanted that Black Lives Matter flag flown, to decide what the next steps would be. So I do not think, and I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody, but it did not come up last week that students felt like there was an issue that it wasn't being flown at that moment because it was in the atrium. That being said, I'm completely in favor of keeping the flag raised or re-raising the flag in addition to the student voice flagpole, but we met to discuss the student voice flagpole so that we could have other voices represented as well. There wouldn't be a conflict among students who would come up with the issue of, well, why is their voice represented and not mine, so that we could ensure there would be fairness in that representation. I don't know if that...
That's something to consider going forward, but we put it up with specific reason because of the current atmosphere
Yes.
in this country, and obviously this plan that to talk about it tonight was 2 weeks ago, and you've met since to talk about it. So we're coming from a different place information-wise. I still think that this is what we stand for, and everybody's voices matter, but right now their homes are on fire, and I say we point the hose at that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I just wanted to make it clear that at that meeting we had last week, there wasn't students who, we did not directly discuss this flag should be flying right at the moment. Because the understanding is we are creating a policy for the future about that. And yes, it is taking a more extended period of time, so that's when this comes up of why isn't being flown right now.
Yeah,
so I hope that clarifies a little.
It's the length of time that has a lot to do with why I'd like it replaced. And, you know, when we took it down, we figured it wouldn't take very long. Silly us.
Right.
Russ?
Yeah, let me, first of all, let me say that had I been at that August meeting and I was at a memorial service for my father, so couldn't do it, you know, I would have been on the side of keeping the flag up to continue. At this point, one reason I thank you for what you had done in your earlier report is it was really heartening to me to hear that the students involved, both, you know, the advocates for the flag and others, you know, were working with the administration. The students were formulating and looking at the difficulty of the language and the potential, you know, pitfalls or loopholes, however you describe it so well. You know, rather than having, you know, this grown-up board sort of say, this is what's going to happen and this is what you have to do. So I really like the idea that you all are working at that and trying to build consensus from everybody that happens. And my concern for the motion, even though that's what I'd like to ultimately see happen, is that I don't want that to undermine your sort of community and consensus building by, you know, you're doing a process and going through something, and for us to sort of jump into the middle and say, oh, you know, change, this is what you have to do now. You know, and this is the first I've heard of that proposal. If that's the result, I'd be totally happy with it. But it's, to me, I really want to hear what you and your community and the students say and feel, and if by imposing that sort of takes some people, you know, out of the discussion and feel that you don't have a voice. That's my concern for that motion. I mean, I don't know if we're going to vote on it, I guess we have to vote on it. I don't know which way I'd vote on it. You know, again, my heart is definitely on that side, but I'd much rather see what, you know, you all propose and come up with. And then you're right, we're the ones that, you know, we are the we are the board, we're the governing body that ultimately has to pass it. But I don't want to short circuit your process. And if by, you know, on tomorrow morning or whenever, you know, having the flag flying is going to cause some sort of controversy, or trying to figure out, you know, what's going on, if we're pulling the rug out of your process, that's where I wouldn't want to, that's what I don't want to do. I want to end up with a really good process where everybody's bought into, and it doesn't seem that it's sort of, yeah, you go ahead, but as long as you agree with us, then we'll listen to you, and if we don't agree with you, then we're not going to, if I'm making myself clear. So I don't know who wants to, yeah.
I think the last thing you have to worry about is this group of students not having a voice. I'm not worried about that at all. I think the understanding, and if I'm wrong, William Jackson, correct me, I think the understanding they're operating on is that the purpose of this policy is independent of whether or not the Black Lives Matter flag is flying at the school. This policy is to consider future requests and to vet the validity of those requests, and also what are the impacts of those requests on the school community. We talked about some pretty, not scary, but some troubling scenarios of different people who could ask to fly flags of questionable intent. And that is a place where we really got bogged down, because the question we wrestled with is who determines what's appropriate and who's not. You know, we talked about the Southern Poverty Law Center, we talked about Anti-Defamation League, we talked about organizations, and then the question really is, well, who determines that those are the arbiters of what is appropriate or not? That discussion would happen regardless if the flag was flagged or not. So, I mean, I don't think the two really are equated. I think their work's going to continue. Am I wrong?
Yes. The only trickiness, for lack of a better word, we get into in that situation is I believe I can speak on behalf of the entire group that met, that everybody would be in favor of those of us who are making the flag policy to see the Black Lives Matter flag up right now going towards the future. The only issue we may encounter is we're trying to create a policy that will transcend all types of voice being heard. And so my only concern would be that if we have that separate from the other policy, I guess we would just have to keep it entirely separate, because we're also addressing how long will each flag be flown, where will they be flown, all of these questions which will apply to multiple student groups and student voices. And I'm just trying to figure out, and it's something we have to determine whether it's closely connected, whether the Black Lives Matter flag should follow the same policy we're making for raising other flags, or whether you can vote on this as a separate issue and it's independent. That's where it might get a little bit.
Because my impression was we were waiting for the policy to go through, right? So that's kind of where it would get tricky on who gets to push what flag, and if this flag gets
Because we
to be
want
raised
to,
independently or something. Yeah.
we want to ensure that flags that are of questionable intent, based on the policy we create, cannot be flown, so that students don't feel unsafe in our school. And to make the students who may want to fly those flags that others feel that are unsafe to their beliefs and their belief system, we're trying to make a policy that is as fair as it possibly can be. And it's also, we discussed that everything in this flag policy discussion is political to some extent, and it's going to be that way, so that's why it becomes a very difficult issue. But at least as a student group, and I think it's very important, as you said, that it is a student group who's doing this, are trying our best to ensure that everybody feels safe, but we can also get this up and going as quickly as possible so that students feel represented.
Ian. Based on our original authorization, the administration can choose to fly the flag if they want to. Because we didn't set a time. You could. This proposal tonight would compel them to, and I don't see any reason why we should compel the flag to be flown. We have a student group and the administration working on this issue. I think they're doing good work, it sounds like, and I feel we should leave it in their hands.
We compelled them to take it down.
But that was when we decided that we were gonna make a policy, right?
No, that was prior to that. That was the school board before the student group even met. Yeah, that's why I completely understand where you're coming from, because it's true that we were not even involved when the decision was made to fly the flag, when the decision was made for the certain period of time. So for your board, I can see why, if you strongly believe that the Black Lives Matter flag should be flown, why this becomes slightly separated from the work we are doing. But at the same time, I think that the policy we are making will hopefully alleviate some of the decision making from you guys to this group of students. And I don't know how you guys want to approach, if you want to have your final say on keeping that flag up at the moment, or if you want to.
Well, that's why I like the idea of having it be up until the policy is created.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was that way that it's.
And it may turn out that the new policy says that we still leave it up. but we don't know where we are with that.
Right.
In the meantime, it's not their fault we couldn't solve the problem. And I would like to see it back up there to show that their lives do matter and that this is their school. They're not guests here, they're not intruders. They belong here, the same as you three lovely white kids do.
Rick?
Yeah, 2 points. First of all, I want to avoid a repeat of setting a policy, then having to take it back down again, because that's just going to make it double the pain, okay? And the second thing is the delay in the development of the policy. I thought was that we were going to get some sort of counsel on it or something.
That's what we're.
No, not student counsel,
Oh.
legal counsel. I thought that was the whole thing why we backed out of it, and I haven't seen any action of that. Have you talked with?
Well, we talked about it in August.
You did?
We did.
With
yeah.
a lawyer?
Right, and that's what I present. That was the basis for which the board decided to not fly it. Because what our counsel said, and I'm going to paraphrase what he said. What he said is if you have any flag up at all, you are in essence responsible to consider all requests from all comers for flags.
Now, tell me if I'm mistaken, it branches out from there from a school risen flag and a student risen flag, correct? Or is it one and the same? Because we had the school voice flag and we had the flagpole out front, and I didn't know if there was a difference there.
I don't believe
There's a slight.
I don't want to speak for the attorney, but he really wasn't making a distinction. He was just saying, you know, when you fly a flag at student request or any community request, you do then have an obligation to consider any request, and that's
Consider, you don't have to accept.
Right, but you do need to have a procedure that you would follow to vet those requests, and that was where we went to create a committee that's where this policy came from, was the idea being that we would want to have criteria that we used to weigh those requests. So we talked about that in August, and then planning and policy gave us the direction to say, well, we want to have a committee based in the school of students and staff that would vet those requests. So we did get the answer from legal counsel.
Okay.
And that was the answer in August. Was that if once you consider one request, you need to give equal weighting to other requests that would come up.
Equal consideration, not necessarily that we have to give in.
Okay. Equity's not equal, I get it.
All right.
Oh, Ricky, could you, since you're so good at that, review what the motion was?
The way I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that we are instructing the administration on all three parts of the campus to refly the Black Lives Matter flag until there is a policy created and approved for future flag and voice.
That
policies.
sounds very accurate.
Did I get all the pieces in there? I think? All right. So that's the motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion related to that?
How soon are we going to develop a policy?
Well, they are working on it.
They're doing it.
The administration, staff, and students are creating a draft or a proposed policy that will then go to planning and policy. Once it's approved from there, then the standard procedure is that it goes through 3 readings of the board for final approval. And then once it goes to the full board, that's when it would become public knowledge at the first reading. So then if there's any pieces that the student administrative faculty group missed or planning and policy missed, there's another opportunity for engagement.
And that would be a 3-read policy.
3-read policy like always, and then on the 3rd reading we'd approve it, and then it would become the policy.
So right there, that's a month or more.
Or more, yeah, depending on how long.
And that's if the board opts to make it a local board policy.
Right.
Yeah, the other option, and I think this is what you were talking about before, don't make it a policy, make it something, an administrative.
Just administrative procedure.
Yeah, if it's decided to be administrative procedure.
We can do that without any of that.
Right. So the committee of students and administrative and staff and faculty could put together a draft procedure, not call it a policy, draft procedure. It would go through planning and policy just as a approval method, just to be aware of what the procedure is. It would become aware at a board meeting. We would not vote on that. It would just be a procedure that would happen.
I believe that was the first thing I suggested.
It would just become a procedure of the school. It would just be a school procedure, not a policy. And that would be but to get to your question, Rick, that would be a faster process, because then we wouldn't have to go through the 3-read process of 3 board meetings, with everything, at best we're talking 6 weeks, but it's probably more than that just to get through the 3-read policy, for a policy. So as far as expediency, a procedure would be faster than a policy.
Not 3 weeks, three
meetings,
which would be a month and a half.
Yeah, 6 weeks, right.
So the motion as it stands would state that we continue to fly or refly the Black Lives Matter flag until there is a policy. But then if we decide it's not going to be a policy, it's just going to be a procedure, then where does that leave us?
I think,
again, it's part of the procedure, but
I guess I'm feeling as though when the students bring that policy to planning and policy or to the whole board, I think you can make that decision then.
Right.
I don't think you need to make that decision tonight. You can listen to what they bring and then
We could decide at that point to make it just say we don't want it as a policy, we'll have it be an administrative procedure.
Right. And then if you want to weigh the option of making it a local board policy, you could do it then.
Once we see what comes forward. All right, are we good? Discussion-wise, question-wise?
I just can't stop it. Because I hear a little disconnect between what Ann's hearing and what you're hearing. And I was really impressed when, I didn't ask for who exactly was there, but at this meeting, do you have a sense from students, including students of color, that this is upsetting and that they want this up, or is everyone on board that the process you're going through is a process that doesn't happen overnight and is moving along and is comfortable with it? Because that's not the sense that Ann is hearing from other people. Because at a moment of crisis is a hard time to make decisions. So if it's going at a steady, rational pace and people don't feel pressure, I'm not sure. I'm just afraid of creating pressure that doesn't need to be there.
So I don't want to speak on behalf of the students of color who are at that meeting because I am not directly affected by the raising of the Black Lives Matter, although it's something that I think is really important that we have at the school for the sake of having an involving community. But at that specific meeting that we discussed, there was not discussion from the students of color or any of the other students about having the Black Lives Matter flag re-raised as a separate situation from the student voice policy we are creating. We didn't even discuss that in the meeting. We were simply discussing the proposal for the student voice flag and how we can make that proposal fair for everybody and how we can arrange that. And it was clear that within that proposal, the Black Lives Matter flag would be one of the flags that would be proposed to see up and to see raised. I think that was understood.
So, because if I believe that that people who are affected by this are thinking by us not flying it is more of an offense, then I say absolutely, put the flag up just as we did in the spring. And that was the reason why we did it. And I think that was important. So I'm just trying to sense if that's the situation we're in now. I just don't want to mess up
Yeah.
the process is all.
Yeah.
Because I totally believe, given who's involved, the process will come up with something really good. And my belief is that, the Black Lives Matter flag will fly and fly soon again, as well as staying in the atrium. And I think that's great that that's there. So, I don't know.
I guess I don't see a downside to moving ahead with the motion that's been made.
Yeah, the fact that it's limited, so it's not, when you first talked about grandfathering in, so whatever your policy is, make sure that it's there forever. That may be the result, but to sort of preload that discussion by saying, that, and there are reasons why we let the Black Lives Matter flag fly, and I know I talked about it at some of those meetings as well, is that this is a very specific case, and there is something different, and that's why it should happen.
So could we have a discussion about this on our meeting Friday with all of the students who were involved in this, about the grandfathering in that as part of the policy, or is this something you, as a board, want to decide?
I mean, that's something for you to decide what to do. I mean, to make that decision. I don't know if that would be a
I agree with the idea that pending the formulation of the new policy would be a more reasonable motion.
To not hijack their process.
And not to hijack the word grandfather,
Okay.
but to...
Then I'm fine with that,
pending a new policy.
spirit and behind that,
That's-
and I don't.
Okay. Are we good? Ian?
Steve, were you just asking for a yes vote?
I don't see a downside to flying, and I see a lot of pluses. And if you gave me the decision to make tomorrow morning, it would be flying.
And none of the students who were represented at that meeting would have any, I don't want to speak on behalf of everybody, but there would be, as far as I believe, no protest to that whatsoever.
Mr. Chairman, you can call the question.
And I think let's do that. All right, so all in favor of having the administration refly the Black Lives Matter flag on all three parts of the campus until a policy is created, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed or abstentions? None. All right. Done. We're moving forward. So everybody has
Might be a few days until we figure out how to order.
get the flags, right.
I've already got it.
So there we go. There we go. All right.
Can I just,
Yeah.
I have a little anecdote that I could share.
Sure.
In 1960, in Virginia, in Prince Edward County, the integration was ordered by the Supreme Court, and they chose not to integrate. So in Prince Edward County, what they did is they shut down all public schools. Then they set up private schools where people of white skin could go, and all the black students had no place to go to school. And that lasted for 5 years. That was in 1960, which happened to be the year that I started high school. And I went to a Quaker high school in Iowa, and that school invited 2 students of color from Prince Edward County to come and go to school at Scattergood School, my high school. And I had the privilege of having one of those individuals who came as a roommate. And it was really an amazing experience. So I just think it's something that's real, this whole issue, and I think what you're doing is fantastic.
I also think that hopefully the next school board meeting, if we continue discussing this with this board and the school committee, will hopefully create that there are students of color who come here and speak about it as well.
Thanks. All right. Before we wrap up. We have some executive session things that we need to do, so I'm going to move that we go into executive session to discuss student matters, and we're going to invite high school and middle school administration in for that, but everybody else will be excused. Unless you feel a need to come?
I don't think so. Assume you don't need.
Excellent.
Any action?
Yeah, we can step in next door and do those.
If it's conducive to you, I can wait in the hallway as well. So if it's conducive for you to stay where you're sitting.
Either way, doesn't matter.
This, you're gonna do the motion to go in executive session?
I just did. We need to have a second and a vote. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. All right, we're going into executive session.
Okay, so.
It is 9:59 and we just came out of executive session to discuss some student matters, and we've done that, and there's no action for us to take as a board related to those matters. So is there a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
there being no further business before the board, I move that we adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye. Opposed or abstentions? We are adjourned.